the first Saturday morning or evening teaching, depending on where you are in the world. Oh. In some ways, I've waited a long time for this moment. Years. And I always wondered, where would I start? Because there's so much to talk about. It may not seem like it right now with this first video, but as the weeks and months and years go by and these teachings start to accumulate, I believe you'll see what I mean. But the question of where to begin, I suppose, will be the first topic. No matter where you are in your practice, whether you're advanced in meditation and spirituality and enlightenment, or you're a beginner, you've never really explored any of it, you've been a bit disillusioned by the forcefulness of religion, and so you just kind of disowned all of it. No one blames you. But no matter where you are on that spectrum, what's more important is that you are in this moment, right now. The present moment is the key. It is the fundamental key to understanding life, to understanding why you exist. Not only that, but to drastically improve the quality of your life, the experience of your life. This moment, this is it, right here. And it's interesting because you may have heard like the books like Be Here Now and The Power of Now, mindfulness, which is all about being in the present moment. It's become a, what's the word, keyword or a hot buzzwords, being present moment or being in the now. But to some degree, it can be a concept in our mind until we have an epiphany, a realization of just how deep that point it goes. It's ironic because the present moment is not only the beginning, but it's also the end in so many different levels. In other words, like everything you're seeking, everything you are, both begins and ends in this moment. As if the answers have always been right here with you, following you every moment. But we don't notice, and we don't experience the peace and the relief of enlightenment because we're so lost in our minds, in our thoughts. And maybe right now, you might notice some thoughts that are coming in. A voice that speaks and about how you are interpreting what you're hearing so far, or what you're seeing. And the voice of our mind, it's very familiar. It has a very familiar feeling to it for most of us, because it's been talking and talking and talking for so many years of our lives. I don't know when the voice technically develops, somewhere in childhood or adolescence, maybe between probably as soon as we start to learn language, we start to have thought. I don't know. But the fact that we find it so familiar and safe is what makes it so difficult to release. And yet releasing it is so fundamental for experiencing enlightenment, for experiencing realizations of who we really are, which is beyond the mind. It is beyond the thoughts. What we don't realize as well is that that voice in your head, that's in everyone's head until they awaken, is wild, untamed, fluctuates between positive and negative quite dramatically if you're new to these practices. You go from having peaceful, happy thoughts to very dark, maybe even violent thoughts. And all of that is built in conditioning from your life experiences. But we can't begin to free ourselves from the mind until we first listen to it, until we first become aware of it and give it awareness. And if you're wondering why you would want to free yourself from the mind, then you have to examine what exactly does all those thoughts represent. It does give us organization. It does give us quite a bit of power. If it wasn't for our minds, we probably wouldn't be the most powerful, so to speak, species on this planet. Physically, we're certainly not the most powerful, but our intellect is what makes us. It gives us an advantage towards all the other animals. But with great power, as Spider-Man says, or wherever that quote came from, great power comes great responsibility. And so we as humans have been given this incredible power, but we haven't been very responsible with it. And I'm not speaking just about you that's listening, but about humans in general. Right? You look into the past. I mean, the past is quite dark. Uh, all kinds of insanity. Millions of people dying for no reason other than human drama. Genocide and just immense violence, both on the collective scale and on individual scales, as I'm sure you've also experienced violence in many ways, both physically and mentally, psychologically. And any form of violence is really a byproduct of the mind in an untamed, wild-like nature. And this goes into very deep subjects about forgiveness, passion, understanding all within ourselves and all of those around us, love. But another one of the fundamental pieces of enlightenment is sincerely realizing, that it's not about pointing at where everybody else is wrong or not spiritual, crazy, or insane, or deluded, or whatever, but always, always, always looking at ourselves. When we have the thought of this person over there as being a bit insane, are we also noticing that we ourselves are having a judgment? That is more important than pointing the finger at the person that's being insane. The more you apply this and really take full responsibility for every single thought you have, every fantasy, imagination, daydream, the more you can develop and deepen your understandings of who you really are and who you're not. And that's a big part of really getting to know who you are. Just getting to know just how much you're identified with things that are not who you are. And it's not your fault. It's just all part of nature. And you happen to be on the front lines of a big evolutionary moment in human nature, which is awakening. And I know that the words like awakening and enlightenment, they seem a bit mystical or like, I don't know, a bit surreal or something. To the mind, they certainly are. So in this moment, kind of step back within yourself, drop in, give your internal world attention right now, and notice what are you feeling and what thoughts are playing in your head. And don't judge whatever it is. If it's positive, beautiful, enjoy. If there's something negative, then observe, be with it, breathe into it, allow it to be there. So much of enlightenment is also cultivating this internal awareness, not just when you're seated in a meditation for 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, but the real deep practice is when it never turns off. You're always being aware, always listening to yourself, giving yourself attention, full attention. Because everything you're seeking, the peace, the joy, the healing, it is all intimately connected with who you really are. And another part of awakening is realizing that you need nothing other than the deepest parts of yourself. You're not dependent on anything in the outside world. Which is what Jesus meant when he said, to transcend the world, to overcome the world. It's not that you leave the world necessarily. It just means that you become a light. You don't necessarily reflect all the darkness with the excuse of everybody else is doing it. You're just naturally being the change because you're deeply working on everything that's going on within you. Again, wherever you wherever you believe you are on the spectrum of advancement in spiritual practice or in enlightenment, put down that label for a moment and simply ask yourself, how often do I experience suffering? And to what depth? Do you have moments of intense reactivity, fear, depression, sadness, anger? The list goes on with the different flavors of reactivity. But have you experienced, let's say in the last week or month, any reactivity, any suffering? And again, suffering doesn't just mean, when I first used to hear that word, I would think it meant like, I don't know, just the most extreme versions of pain, right? Physically and mentally. But the way the Buddha meant it, when he said enlightenment is the end of suffering, what he meant is on all spectrums, both the really dark, intense suffering of like, even like suicidal thoughts and that deep level of depression, then also the lighter things, like just a little sense of impatience or irritation or deceit, discomfort, unease. Anything within that spectrum is suffering, the most extreme and the most gentle. And often in our awakening, once you start to feel you become more advanced, you've already worked through a lot of the heavy, obvious stuff, and you start to work on the more subtle level of the smaller things, little tiny feelings of judgment or irritation, impatience. They're very subtle, so they're very hard to catch. You have to be very alert, internally aware to catch these more subtle levels. Apologies for the dogs. I cannot control them. Maybe I'll mute myself for a second while they bark. Part of my intention too with sharing these teachings is not just talking about them, but putting them into practice. I live these teachings, and I will show it even while I'm doing these live sessions. I can't control Zen when he decides to bark at the mailman. But if I would suffer if I resisted what is, if I in my head went, "Oh, come on, dog. You're not supposed to be barking while I'm doing this live session. It's going to be recorded, and then lots of people are going to be watching later." And all this resistance to what is, and fear and bits of pain. But if I couldn't hold the practice while talking about it, then I certainly wouldn't be ready to talk about it. It's ironic that his name is Zen too. He likes to challenge things, chew up things that I appreciate or might be a bit attached to. Challenges my attachments. Animals, by the way, are beautiful beings. They, be mindful of not giving them human minds. They don't have human minds. That's our projection, that they have all this extra thinking and fear and all that stuff. I do think they have a bit of emotions, but I think those are conditioned upon from humans that they live with. As Eckhart calls dogs and cats, the ones that live with us, they're guardians of being, and they really are. It's so beautiful. Because anytime you look at the dog, you can just know that they're resting in that state of thoughtless awareness, just presence, attention, no drama, which is actually so close to the enlightened state. The only difference is they don't have a choice as to whether they think or not. So they can't use the powerful tool, whereas we have the powerful tool. But we haven't, generally speaking, mastered the ability to use our mind when it's valuable to use, and to put it down the other 90% of the time. It's just rambling on, creating all kinds of trauma and irritation and suffering. And that actually brings to another point. A fundamental piece is also the fact of questioning your beliefs, especially the one, do you really believe it is possible to quiet your mind on command? Do you really believe it's possible to just have an off switch and turn off whatever thoughts are running in your head? Especially when it's immense suffering involved. When you have fear, insecurity, doubt, anger, all these different flavors of pain. In those moments, can you turn the mind off? Or do you even believe that it is possible? I hear a lot of people saying in meditation classes and stuff that they don't believe it's possible, that it's not something to be aimed for. And I get it. I get what they're coming from. They're coming from their experience. And they're coming from trying to make it gentle in not having an impossible sort of expectation. I get and respect that. However, it is also limiting because it is possible to quiet the mind on command. It's not easy at first, especially if you're new to all of this, but it is possible. And you can't really find something that you don't believe exists. You can't experience something that you think is not there. So an important part too of enlightenment is recognizing just the possibility. You don't have to create this illusionary thought processes of it being real. Just give it the possibility of being real. Because I myself am speaking from direct experience of these things. This isn't concept to me. This is my life. And it's not something I just ran into recently. It's something I've been applying for 8 years, every single day, every second of every day. Not always successfully, especially earlier on. I had lots of pain bodies to work through. things to heal. But at this point, it's very rare to experience the unconsciousness. One of the common things I hear and see from individuals that I work with in one-on-one sessions over the years is how hard we are on ourselves. Seems especially those that are into spiritual practice and awakening. We have this pattern of perfectionism. We're very hard on ourselves. In fact, we're often our own biggest critics. And when I say we are our own biggest critics, I mean our mind. Mind is our biggest critic. Those thoughts, those repetitive thoughts. And whenever you realize, you hear something and you realize, oh yeah, that does apply to me. Oh yeah, there is a bit of that inside me. Or any bits of ego that you're able to catch. Try your best to remember that it's not personal. It does not represent you. These bits of faults, so to speak, or mistakes, in a sense, are not even really mistakes. They're just exactly where you're supposed to be. And then you bringing awareness to them is how you learn from them, how you move beyond them. If you deny that they're there, you cannot move beyond them, and they will continue to live in the shadows of your consciousness, of who you really are. And there's consequences to having those shadows, and that is suffering. But that's something I hear so often, is we catch a pattern within ourselves. We catch something like, let's say, I talk about superiority and inferiority, and then all of a sudden you go, oh man, there is a bit of superiority. But what happens usually is we catch that and we feel pain. We feel embarrassment or something. We feel some kind of just uncomfortableness with looking at what's occurring within us. And there's a sense of denial in that. And that's because we've fallen into this illusion that thing we're observing represents us in any way. But it doesn't. It only represents our conditioning. This is a straight path to forgiveness, not only of yourself and your mind, where you are in your practice, but also equally with everyone else you encounter on this planet. I think there's almost 8 billion people on the planet. When you really understand that nothing is personal, and that no one can act beyond their level of consciousness or advancement in their spiritual practice. There's no personalness whatsoever. It just is. Then forgiveness occurs, natural forgiveness. Not, yeah, I think a lot of times people feel like they need to create forgiveness. They need to make it happen. Effort, energy. Really, get the forgiveness. Gotta get it. I gotta find it. But that's not the deepest level. The deepest level of forgiveness is very effortless, very gentle, but very powerful. And it's like a big wind. It just blows away all of the illusion. In other words, there's a level of forgiveness where you realize nothing needs to be forgiven in the first place. That's the deepest level. If your forgiveness is dependent on apology, that is not deepest forgiveness. That is mind. On the topic of forgiveness as well, we don't realize is our lack of forgiveness doesn't hurt the person that we resent as much as it hurts ourselves. It's like holding a piece of lava. Just the lava is just melting through your hand. It hurts immensely. But you don't realize that you can just turn your hand over and let gravity take it away. Take away all the pain, all that suffering. But doing so also means letting go of all the story, all the mental story, all that whole block of memory, whatever it is that's requiring the forgiveness. Especially if we're talking about forgiveness of things in our uh, prime years of conditioning, in our early years when we were children. So much of our conditioning comes from those formidable years. Okay, use the word. But so truly, so much of our conditioning comes from that. Our pain bodies, which means our areas that are very sensitive, that can be, kind of tickled, and all of a sudden we get really reactive. And another big piece of awakening with realizing who you really are is realizing who you are not. And you are not the past. You are none of that. Not a single thing that's occurred in your past represents you. Although I do believe it's beautiful in its own right. It's like a piece of art. And that's actually how I see everyone. It's these incredibly complex, walking, mosaic pieces of art. But as I see everyone in their states of art, I also don't hold them only to that. I see past that. I see who they really are. Even when they don't, especially when they don't. And what I find interesting too is that when you hold this awareness and you recognize someone beyond who they think they are, well, one, you can only do this if you have recognized it within yourself first. But two, when you do this, it's very powerful for them as well. There's a transference of love, deep, deep love. And it doesn't even have to be verbal. That's what gets really amazing about these things. We're just now kind of getting into the science of how that works with the frequencies of our electromagnetic fields, or all those fancy words. I don't go into that too much, but I've certainly experienced over and over and over again somebody being in an upset mood. I'm holding this frequency of love and seeing through their drama, and they calm down right in front of me, and they don't even know me. Random people. I drove for Uber for years, and thousands of rides. Not a single person was overly dramatic around me. I don't think that's a coincidence. I'm also not claiming credit for that. It is not me. It's the teaching that comes through me, that it is me in a sense, but also the only way to fully embody it is to get out of the way. So that is why I'm able to speak from this place. I've mastered my own practice to a degree, and then life, universe is able to work through me, speak through me in a sense, or love through me. Because the me isn't this dense figure, it's more translucent, dissolved. So I'm just stating from experience that this really is quite powerful. And oftentimes, especially for those that have no concept of these practices, they don't even know what's happened. All they know is like they're just feeling good in that moment. They have no idea that there's other things going on in the background. Then I'm sitting there driving, just allowing them to be exactly as they are, just enjoying the drive. And then somebody cuts me off. Okay, and I love them. I love the guy cutting me off. I've actually, having driven for years, seen some very some interesting experiences, more so with other drivers than with passengers. And I always thought it was funny when like people would be really aggressive that you wouldn't expect. Like somebody would ride up behind me real close and be really like aggressive, and then zoom around me and I kind of looked to see who it was, and it was like a little old grandma, road raging. I just started laughing. I don't know, it's funny. And I don't laugh like in mockery. I don't know. It's just sort of it's a loving laugh. It's just like, okay. I wasn't expecting that. And that's kind of basically how walking in forgiveness is. You know, people do their things, but you don't hold it against them. You recognize they're just playing out their conditionings, their patterns. Although I usually am a bit surprised when people that are a bit older uh, are so impatient. To me, if you've been around for so long and getting closer to the end of your life experience in this form, I would expect it would slow you down a bit and you would just kind of cruise around and not be in a rush, anything, just enjoying the moment. But I guess that kind of represents the fact that it can go many ways. And it does for many people. There are plenty of older people that are incredibly wise and surrendered to life and to the cycle of life and death. And in some deep way, they know that they're much more. And that this present moment is what's sacred. No matter what it looks like or where you are, it is present moment. Present moment is home. When you make the present moment your home, you're always home. You don't need to be in your hometown or in the house you grew up for your entire life. You just need to be in this moment. And being in this moment is actually much more simple than you may think. It's kind of almost, it ironically seems almost designed that way. Because the mind always wants more. It wants something complex, some spiritual practice that's very meticulous, and advanced, and complex, and all these things that gives the mind more food. But deep spiritual practice is keeping the mind, learning to master the mind, to put the mind down, which means also doing things that challenges the mind, like very simple practices. So, you want to be in the present moment? Listen to it. What do you hear right now? Clock ticking. Cars driving in the distance. Sound of my breath. A buzz of some kind of electronic, maybe the fridge or something. Very subtle. Something really beautiful too about listening to the present moment. The noise, the quieter the noise that you can hear, the quieter your mind will be. Because you can't be thinking and hearing these very subtle noises at the same time. Whereas Ram Dass said, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. Or the more you can hear, the quieter you become. And by quieter you become, I believe what he meant was mind becomes quiet. All those thoughts. Now, listening to the present moment is very powerful, but there is a practice that goes even deeper, and that is listening without labeling anything. So, as I was doing, I was saying, oh, car, clock, all these things. Those are labels, really. Those are words attached to the sound. The deepest meditation practice is going beyond labels, beyond, you don't need to label it. You don't need to think that's a clock to hear what it sounds like. Yeah, you don't need to label anything. In fact, when you release those labels, not just the auditorial ones, but visual, taste, feeling, smelling, when you release all those mental little comments that have to do with whatever the stimulus is, you experience a completely different world almost. It's like suddenly everything becomes HD, high definition quality. It's just like you're seeing it for the first time ever, and it's beautiful. So beautiful. It's another trick of the mind. We, when the mind thinks like, for example, this beautiful being here, when the mind says, "Oh, that's a tree. That's a bonsai tree. I know what that is," and then that's it. The curiosity, the inquiry, it ends right there. In that split millisecond of the mind that labels it as such. When you drop those thoughts, and you look at it, you really give it full attention. So beautiful. And the more you start to look at everything around you in that same non judgmental, non labeling awareness, full attention, you see everything as beautiful. There's nothing that is not beautiful, including other humans. When you can look from that same non labeling, non judging voice in the head of what you're observing, when you're observing another human form, very powerful. Forgiveness naturally occurs, unconditional love naturally occurs. It's what every child craves, unconditional love, that full, non judgmental attention. And so many of us have never experienced it. And this full non judgmental attention is also the power of meditation. When you can give that same high quality attention to yourself, maybe it's better for you to practice giving it to the outside first. Then at some point, take that same attention and flip it inward. Observe the beauty within yourself without judgment, without labels, with forgiveness and unconditional love. There's also a strong correlation between the two, between how you deeply feel within yourself and how you observe the outside world, how you treat the outside reality. Goes very, very deep. I mean, while I do have a bit of a mastery of a lot of the practice, I'm still always going to be a student, and there's always so much more to discover. And I actually feel that right now. Like, even though I'm sharing this with you, there's still so much for me to discover. Exactly how deep does that really go? That connection between the internal and the external reality. So, the other way of practicing this is when you're doing your meditations or anything, maybe also finding that deep, highly alert, non judgmental attention, full attention. Give it to yourself, every part of your being, anything that you can catch within you, especially the ego bits, suffering, the resistance, the anger, the mistakes, not really mistakes, but mistakes, they're lessons. The more you do this, the more you give it to yourself, the more naturally it will just radiate to the outside world. And vice versa, the more you radiate to the outside world, more easily and more deeply you can do it on the inside. Ramana Maharshi has a beautiful quote. Somebody asked him, "How are we to treat others?" And Ramana replied, "There are no others." He was also a beautiful teacher of no thought, no thinking, straight to no thinking. Whatever you're thinking, drop it. Be here. And the mind says, this is interesting. Well, I think I might use some of this stuff. If you're still thinking. You don't need to say that to know that. A lot of people also get stuck with a fundamental belief that all understanding is derived through thinking about it. So when they come to a concept, so to speak, like enlightenment, they're perplexed. They don't get it. It makes no sense. And that's because they're using a very limited tool to understand something that's way more expansive. When you're getting into enlightenment, we're talking about a level of intelligence and power that goes so far beyond the limited human intelligence that it's silly to even try. Like, it's like a newborn baby trying to learn calculus. The first second it takes a breath, comes into the world, and it's like, I need to learn calculus. It's not, it doesn't work that way. You have to allow the time process, the development, the evolution to occur before you can reach higher and higher levels of intelligence or organization, or understanding. And ironically, with enlightenment, because it is very much a practice of putting the mind down, you can't understand these things with the mind. You can to some degree, and yet you can't at the same time. It's like you can understand it conceptually, but you will not directly experience it until you let go of the concept, until you really let go of that desire to understand the mind, which means being comfortable not knowing. Another way of putting it, you can't use the mind to get out of the mind. It would love to keep convincing you that's the way, because then it can maintain its existence, its power. in a way, the mind almost has its own self uh, defensive mechanism, or some, I don't know, some kind of like algorithm or something that tries to maintain its own existence. So it goes through all kinds of back doors to stay alive, especially when it's confronted with teachings like this that are like very threatening to the mind in a sense. But also, quick reminder, we don't need to just destroy the mind completely. It is a valuable tool. We just need to learn to use it wisely and definitely put it down whenever it goes into the unwise. One of the big illusions that the mind loves to hold on to is the idea that you have to like have years and years and years of practice and study and living in monasteries and climbing mountaintops, meditating in the Himalayas, all these fancy, beautiful things to experience enlightenment, to experience a moment of no thinking and of returning to the power and truth of who you are. That is just another trap, another illusion, and it can keep you stuck for an entire lifetime if you believe it the whole time, as it has for many people, and probably will still for many. They'd rather hold on to what they think they know than admit that they do not know. And that's okay. But all you need to not only experience no mind, peace from the mind, and a moment of enlightenment is this moment right now. And that's the beauty and power of a beginner's mind. The beginner is in this constant state of not knowing, genuinely just having no clue. No ideas, no concepts, nothing solidified anyway. Whereas the ones who feel more advanced, they feel like they know things. And that knowing is a huge obstacle for awakening. If you're not already experiencing the full spectrum of awakening, which means, again, the question is, do you experience suffering? If you experience suffering, then there's some place in you that is not willing to admit that it does not know. Because the illusion is that it feels very comfortable saying that we know. It gives us this sense of control. It's not wrong, but it is an obstacle if you want to go even deeper into your practice, into healing, into mastery of your own self, of your own daily life. But identifying where we have suffering, especially if we're a bit identified with being an advanced spiritual practitioner, is we can really fall into these very sneaky levels of denial to maintain a certain image that we've cultivated for ourselves, whether it's just on the physical level of things or on the spiritual level, your spiritual image. It's another big tricky trap of the ego. Because both of them make you feel like you are in some way more superior or inferior to others. And neither are true. This true awakening and enlightenment is a deep recognition of quality. Whether the other person gets it or not, that's their path. If questions are coming up for you throughout this video, please write them down. It may be answered at some point later in the video. But if not, then share it in the question post, and I will answer it in a Q&A. Or I will try to answer it. I don't have all the answers, but my practice right now is just really embodying the state of being very comfortable not knowing, which I've been doing for a long time, but in this very moment of being in sort of a function of teaching, whatever's coming up, this is what's coming up. And when you become really, really sincerely comfortable not knowing, and a question is asked, it's like answer just almost always comes. But it's one of those things where you can't trick yourself, like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna be comfortable not knowing, then I would have everything. You can't trick yourself into it. You can't sneak yourself into it. It's like it's just something that takes a tremendous amount of practice. And that would be a great thing to end on here, since we're coming towards the end of this Saturday teaching. Enlightenment is practice. Practice, 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 practice. Every second is practice. It is not some easy equation where like you have this one epiphany and oh, I get everything now. Not to say that can't happen. It has happened. But for me, just about everybody I've ever talked to in person, it is not that way. It is practice, 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 practice. Very important piece of that to know, to remind yourself, because when you lose the practice, when you lose your peace, when you lose your joy, your stillness, your being, your knowing, you're not wrong for this. This is just where your practice is. That's it. It's nothing personal. There's no wrongness. There's no need to be perfect. Accept your imperfection. Forgive it if you feel like you need to forgive it, I guess. And learn. Use it. Grow. Evolve. Life is constantly giving us what we need to deepen. The more you deeply know this, not conceptually, but deeply know this within yourself, so like life just simply becomes so much more meaningful and enjoyable, friendly, because you're working with life finally, not fighting it anymore. And you realize nothing is random. Everything has a reason. But one of my biggest intentions with this online course that is now being created is to just highlight what's possible and give you tools and practices that have really worked for me over these years. And also for me to be real about where I still slip. I still slip here and there. There's no question. I don't care. I'll share it. Not embarrassed. Just is. But I also really very much want to help those who feel they're advanced, who feel, I see and hear on Facebook quite often in various groups, a lot of people have the right answers mentally. They answer so beautifully, poetically, eloquently. They answer your questions, share insightful posts and videos and wisdom. But what I'm interested in and interested in challenging you is how much of that beautifully cultivated knowledge is direct, everyday, 24/7 experience. Because it is possible to have that 24/7 experience. Although I'm not at 24/7, I'm at like 23.587. I think the only reason I'm at that place or this place of practice is just because I've embraced everything that I'm sharing for years. I've really embraced where my practice was getting lost and learning from it and practice, learning, slipping and learning, slipping and learning. I can't tell you how many times. It's like uncountable number of times. Thank you for sharing your present moment with me, watching this video, whether live or in recording. Technically, it's always live. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being you and being wherever you are in your practice. And doing your best. I know you're doing your best. Everybody's doing their best.